Claire lent her new neighbor June a simple cup of sugar, only to discover months later that her husband had given far more behind her back. Evan wasn't just unfaithful, he manipulated both women while quietly stealing from his own company, confident no one would dare expose him. But June uncovered a paper trail, and Claire, with steady hands and silent rage, turned it into a plan. And you won't believe how this quiet domestic betrayal unraveled and why justice, in the end, tasted sweeter than revenge. It was the kind of Tuesday that came wrapped in gray. Sky swollen, sidewalks slick, the world just wet enough to keep people inside. Claire Adams was doing what she did best when the house got too quiet, listening for things that weren't being said. The hum of the fridge, the faint tick of the thermostat shifting, the silence in the hallway that had lasted 6 days now. Evan was working from the bedroom again, or so he said. He had brought his laptop in there 3 nights ago and barely emerged except for coffee and quick, unfinished dinners. Deadlines, he told her. Clients need answers in real time. Claire hadn't argued. She'd learned not to chase storms when they were still gathering. You wait them out, you watch the clouds, and you hope they pass without damage. That's when the doorbell rang. It was a clear, sharp sound, one that didn't belong in the soft gloom of the house. She opened the door to find a young woman on the porch, bundled in an oversized hoodie, strands of damp hair clinging to her face. She looked like someone caught between errands and uncertainty. "Hi," she said, a little breathlessly. "Sorry to bother you. I'm June. I just moved into 6B. I'm baking something and realized I don't have sugar." Her smile was half apology, half charm. The kind of smile that hoped you wouldn't mind being interrupted. Claire blinked at her for a second, then let out a soft laugh, not unkind. "That might be the most classic move-in line I've heard in years," Claire said. She turned to grab the canister. "Welcome to Willow Lane. We trade sugar and gossip around here, sometimes in that order." She scooped a couple of cups into a Ziploc and handed it over. The sugar sparkled under the hallway light, plain and innocent. June took the bag with both hands like it was something fragile. "This place is beautiful," June said, peeking past Claire's shoulder. "Your husband drives the gray Tesla, right?" Claire nodded, instinctively straightening. "That's Evan. He works at Lamont Digital, marketing director." "Ah," June said, eyes lighting up. "He helped me carry a dresser this morning. Super helpful. Really kind." It was a harmless comment, almost too harmless. But the way it lingered in the space between them made something quiet inside Claire shift. She didn't know why, just a flicker, like static before a storm. She tucked it away without reacting. Habit. "Thanks again for the sugar," June said. "I'll bring the bag back tomorrow." Claire smiled, polite, no rush. She closed the door and turned back toward the kitchen, just as Evan appeared from the hallway. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his hair tousled like he'd been lying down, not typing emails. "Who was that?" he asked, casually. "New neighbor," Claire said. "June, needed sugar." Evan nodded too quickly. "Ah." A pause, then that half-smile he wore when he wanted to seem unfazed. Something behind his eyes flickered, there and gone too fast to catch. Claire noticed it the way you notice a cold draft and wonder where the windows cracked. That night, while Evan stayed buried in unreadable spreadsheets and half-meant apologies, Claire sat at the kitchen island with her coffee. She stirred slowly, watching the cream swirl into patterns that didn't last. She had meant to sweeten it, but the taste turned bitter. She drank it anyway. Outside, the porch light glowed through the soft patter of rain. Inside, the house felt too perfect, too still. A borrowed cup of sugar, a harmless smile, a missed detail. Claire didn't know it yet, but the crack had already begun to spread. The next afternoon, June reappeared on the porch, this time without rain, only nervousness clinging to her sleeves. She held a Ziploc bag filled with cookies still faintly warm, a small cloud of fog pressed against the plastic like breath on glass. "I brought these to say thank you," she said, smiling like someone who wasn't sure if they were welcome but came anyway. "You saved my pie." Claire opened the door wider, hesitated for a moment that felt longer than it was, and then said the kind of thing she had trained herself to say. "Come in." Because that was who Claire had decided to be, a person who leaves doors open, even when the air behind them feels heavier than expected. They sat at the kitchen island, a quiet corner of the house that had hosted everything from anniversary toasts to lonely bowls of cereal. June nibbled one of her own cookies, nervous energy wrapped in sweetness. She spoke quickly, filling silences the way some people fill cracks in plaster, too eagerly, too carefully. A childhood in rural Ohio, a nursing program she'd almost finished before her mother's diagnosis pulled her home. 3 moves in 2 years. This new town was meant to be a beginning, or maybe a pause. It wasn't clear. Claire responded with curated honesty. Freelance design work, a marriage that looked good in photos, the weight of 2 years trying to have a child without result. She didn't say everything, but she said enough. Enough to see that June listened not just politely, but deeply, like a sponge absorbing what others let drip. When Evan walked through the front door earlier than usual, it felt like a scene mistimed. His shirt was too crisp, his scent too clean, like he'd freshened up somewhere else before walking in. "Hey," he said, with that disarming casualness he reserved for company. June looked up and smiled. There was a flash in her expression, recognition, maybe, or memory. Her shoulders stiffened, and a flush crept up her neck like someone who'd accidentally worn something too bright to a quiet dinner. Claire noticed it, just a flicker, but the kind that stays in your mind long after the moment ends. They talked about nothing in particular. Neighborhood groups, trash day rumors, the local Thai place that swore it was 10 minutes away despite everyone knowing it wasn't. Evan was smooth, engaged. He laughed just enough. He asked just the right questions. The version of him Claire had fallen for. The version she rarely saw without company present. Later that night, Claire stood in the laundry room folding towels when her eye caught something on Evan's Apple Watch as he left it to charge. A message, brief, preview only. "Thank you for the drive. I needed the air. Jay." She froze. Her breath caught on the edge of a single syllable. She didn't recognize the number, but she didn't need to. She knew June's handwriting. She knew how people sign texts when they knew they shouldn't be sending them. Jay. So casual, so practiced. Claire stared at the message as if it might rearrange itself into something innocent. It didn't. She didn't say anything that night, not yet. She lay beside Evan, awake long after his breathing evened out, and wondered how many other women had stared at ceilings trying to memorize the last night they believed they were safe. The next afternoon, with hands steadier than her stomach, Claire asked, not accusatory, just careful, "Did you give June a ride home after the cookout?" Evan exhaled like she had asked him to cancel a meeting. She was overwhelmed. Some teenager said something to her. She panicked. "I was just helping." His words were light, dismissive, efficient. "It was nothing," he said. And there it was, the lie that always sounds the same, no matter who says it. It was nothing. Nothing that piles into everything. Nothing that turns into, "How could you?" Nothing that stains silence like smoke clings to curtains. Claire didn't push. She simply nodded. But something clicked inside her, a quiet, irreversible shift. She began to observe instead of ask. She noticed Evan's phone face down on the counter, the shared looks across driveways, the plate of cookies one morning that weren't from any recipe Claire had ever seen June use. And then, one evening, the confession didn't knock. It simply entered. Claire was pouring tea when she heard her name, spoken gently, too gently, from the hallway. She turned to find June standing there, eyes red-rimmed, posture like someone bracing for weather. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice was small, uneven, a sound barely surviving its own shame. "I made a mistake with Evan." The room didn't move, but everything inside Claire did. There was no scream, no dramatic glass shattering, just a breath, held, then dropped.
a heat crawling up Claire's neck, meeting something cold that settled deeper. "You," she started, but the sentence frayed. The word "you" didn't feel like enough, or maybe it felt like too much. Instead, she asked the only question that ever really matters when trust disappears. Why? June blinked rapidly, like the answer stung her before it escaped. "Because I was stupid," she said. "Because he offered to help. He understood hospital bills. He said he could get me a remote role with his team, just to tide me over. I felt seen, just once, like I mattered." She swallowed, shame making her voice go thinner. "And because when someone twice your age looks at you like you're the only lit room on a dark street, it's hard not to step inside." Claire didn't cry, not then. Some betrayals don't hit the tear ducts, they hit lower, somewhere around dignity. The girl she'd welcomed with sugar had wandered barefoot into her life and left footprints across everything clean. And the man she'd shared a house and history with had laid the carpet. Her hands gripped the kitchen counter, quartz biting into skin. She looked straight at June. "Get out," she said, voice calm like the eye of a storm. June left without protest, just a small crumpled nod. The sound of the front door closing was louder than it should have been. Claire stood alone in the kitchen with the sugar canister, its lid slightly off. The Ziploc bag from a week ago still folded neatly near the window. The smell of the cookies hung in the air like a joke that went too far. For the first time in years, Claire understood why something so sweet could make your teeth hurt. Bitterness had arrived, and it had made itself home.
The house did not collapse. It shifted. In the days that followed the confession, the geography of Claire's world rearranged itself. The hallway between the bedroom and the guest room, once just 10 short steps, now felt like a demilitarized zone. Evan moved his things slowly, wordlessly. No fight, no screaming match, just silence negotiated like a ceasefire. They both agreed, no shouting. No explanations that hadn't already been delivered and dissected in Claire's head 100 times. The door between their rooms stayed closed, not locked, just final. Across the street, June's porch light remained off. The apartment behind it silent. No music, no movement, just the dim presence of someone waiting out their own storm. Claire's phone, on the other hand, stayed loud. Buzz after buzz, messages falling like hail. Evan's texts came first, long paragraphs dressed in guilt and self-reflection. He used words like misstep and pressure, like the whole thing had happened under weather conditions he couldn't control. June's messages came too, though fewer, shorter, sincere but carefully measured, as if she knew she'd already said too much and now could only risk saying too little. Then came the others, friends, neighbors, colleagues, confused, curious, carefully choosing sides under the banner of just checking in. Claire wanted to hurl the phone into the sink and flip the garbage disposal switch, just to hear the sound of control. Instead, she worked. Design was her sharpest clarity. She buried herself in a rebrand for a startup bakery, a client who asked for something honest and warm. Claire stared at the request for a long time, the irony slicing deep. She gave them something clean and elegant, yes, but she hit a razor edge in the typography, just enough. In therapy, the story came out twice, once with clipped sarcasm, once like evidence on the record. Her therapist, a woman with eyes that held space without rushing to fill it, tilted her head and asked one simple question. What did you want most when she asked for sugar? Claire blinked. The answer arrived before logic could filter it. To be the kind of person who gives it, she said. It surprised her how true it was, how quickly it surfaced. The therapist didn't write anything down, just nodded. Keep that, she said softly. We'll decide later who deserves it. A few days later, Evan appeared in the kitchen doorway like someone hoping the rules had changed. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his expression carefully built. A performance he'd likely rehearsed. I messed up, he said. I know that.
Claire looked up but didn't interrupt. "I've been under pressure, with work, with everything, and we've both been stressed about the baby stuff. You've been distant. I made a mistake. I'll do anything to fix it." He said it all like he was handing over a damaged appliance and asking for a refund. Claire set her mug down gently and turned toward him. "You didn't trip and fall into our neighbor," she said, voice level. "You made a choice, then another, and then you made a habit out of those choices." He blinked, the mask slipping for just a second. "Why?" she asked. Evan inhaled, deep, deliberate. "Because I was lonely," he said, like a wounded confession. But there was something in his tone, something too practiced, too pitiful. Claire didn't flinch. Her reply was smooth, razor-edged. "Then learn to be lonely," she said. "Learn to be a grown man." She didn't raise her voice, she didn't cry. There was no monologue. Just a woman who had spent enough time watching patterns to know when they wouldn't change. The next morning, she found an envelope on the welcome mat. No postage, just her name in a soft, slanted hand. Inside, a letter. And a reckoning. June had written it on notebook paper, some lines crossed out and rewritten. The ink wavered in places where the pen had hesitated. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for permission to help you if you want it." Attached were screenshots, messages from Evan. "You scratch my back and I'll make sure you land something easy. We can keep this quiet. You're an adult, right? Claire won't leave. She's stable. She needs me more than I need her." Claire read them all, once with anger, twice with precision. But it was the last line that lodged somewhere deep. "He told me you'd never leave because you don't know who you are without him. I think you do." Claire set the pages down, slowly, deliberately. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. Instead, she leaned back in the kitchen chair and let the weight of it settle. June's letter didn't fix anything, but it reframed the picture. Claire didn't forgive her, not even close. But for the first time, she saw her not as a villain, but as someone who tried to bargain safety for survival and ended up bartering away more than she'd expected. Compassion is a muscle, and Claire, despite everything, had always been strong. She didn't soften, but she made room for truth, if not for comfort. Even the antagonist, it turned out, had a reason that could fit in her hand. And maybe that was the first real lesson bitterness had taught her. Not everything that breaks you is evil. Some things just come undone under pressure. And once they do, you get to decide what you build next.
Compassion didn't change what had been done, but it changed what Claire was going to do next. It didn't seal the crack in the window. It didn't fix the silence in the hall. But it did something just as important. It stopped her from tearing the house down in the dark. She had spent the last week picking through fragments of the life she thought she understood. Now, she started examining not just what had broken, but what had been built wrong to begin with. She no longer looked away. She pulled up rugs. She opened drawers. And that's when June came back, hesitant, almost formal, standing on the porch again like she'd never been there before. "There's something else," June said, arms crossed tight over her chest. "Something I didn't want to believe." Claire leaned against the doorframe, saying nothing. "Evan asked me to help with a side project," June continued. "Just a few hours of data entry. I figured it was simple, harmless. But the invoices were weird." "How weird?" Claire asked. June swallowed. "Same client name, but different addresses. Retainer amounts didn't match. Doubled in some cases. I wasn't sure what I was looking at, but it didn't feel right." Claire's voice was colder than she expected. "You think he's skimming?" The words tasted dry, like courtrooms and affidavits and the kind of paperwork that ends jobs. They met later that evening in June's apartment. Neutral territory. June's living room still smelled faintly of cinnamon and soap. But the laptop on the coffee table told a colder story. She had printed and forwarded everything. Claire sat beside her like a surgeon preparing for a precise incision. There it was. Invoices with inflated amounts. Multiple consultants routed to a shell LLC, registered to an address that didn't exist. Expense reports bloated beyond plausibility. The kind of scheme you could almost get away with if you smiled while signing the paperwork. Claire didn't flinch. Her pulse didn't quicken. She simply nodded, her mind already stitching together next steps. Proof does what betrayal can't. It gives you choice. It gives you power. It gives you leverage. "Why are you bringing this to me?" Claire asked, her tone flat but not cold. June hesitated for only a second. "Because he told me he loved me while CCing me on an invoice," she said, voice like glass. "Because he said I owed him. Because I may have made stupid choices, but I'm not owned by them. Because you gave me sugar when I didn't deserve it. And now I want to give you something back that does matter." Claire nodded once. There were no tears, no sentimental speeches, just mutual recognition between two women who'd both seen the same face and finally stopped pretending it was kind. They made a plan. No theatrics, no anger-fueled impulse, only strategy. Claire called in a favor from a lawyer she'd known since college. Someone sharp, discreet, loyal. June had the screenshots, the date stamps, the folder of forwarded messages. And something harder to come by, the resolve to testify if it came to that. Evan, they knew, had an ego, fattened on the assumption that neither woman would ever choose the kind of rage that documents things. They proved him wrong. The confrontation took place on a Sunday. The sky was gray, the kind of flat, cold gray that made everything feel heavier. Claire laid the documents out on the dining table. She didn't pace, she didn't yell, she simply waited. Evan arrived, phone in hand, halfway through a sentence that died when he saw the folder. "What is this?" he asked. Claire didn't answer with emotion. She answered with facts. Invoices, dates, redirected payments, timestamps. Emails with his signature, offering padded referrals in exchange for silence. Evan's face went through stages: disbelief, annoyance, feigned indignation. He picked up each one like a tie he wasn't sure how to knot. Then came the one he always defaulted to: charm. "You're overreacting," he said. "You're letting her manipulate you." Claire didn't blank. "You should have chosen your audience better," she said. "I'm filing for legal separation this week, and I'm sending all of this to Lamont's internal counsel tomorrow morning." He opened his mouth to argue, but she kept going. "You can call your lawyer or your mother or your HR department, but you don't call me, ever again." He tried again, now reaching for the story he thought would make him the victim. "June did this. She set me up. She's been after me from day one." Claire held up a hand, not to silence him, but to finish it cleanly. "Then you should have locked the door, and you should have kept your hands off the handle." That stopped him. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He sagged in place, shoulders deflating like a balloon in a too-quiet room. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was low, transactional. Claire looked him dead in the eye. "Nothing you can give me," she said, "and half of everything you said we built." Outside, June was waiting near her porch, arms crossed, eyes red. A stance that looked like prayer, except prayer didn't fold in on itself like that. Claire stepped out into the cold. She didn't speak at first. She didn't smile. She simply said, "We're done here." And June, quiet, trembling, changed, just nodded. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't the ending. Sometimes it's two women standing on separate porches, breathing the same air. Both survivors of the same storm. Both still standing. Lamont's internal counsel moved faster than Claire expected. By Friday, Evan's laptop had been claimed as company property. His keycard failed at the front gate. His title disappeared from the website like it had never existed. The words "pending investigation" followed him like a shadow with teeth, subtle but visible in every polite silence from coworkers and contacts. He cried once, not in front of Claire. In a voicemail, his voice cracking under the weight of something he'd spent too long pretending he could carry. The version of Claire who might have softened at the sound was gone. What remained was calm, deliberate. She didn't press play again. When Evan texted now, it was about things like the mortgage, the car title, or which storage bin held the winter coats. He wrote a longer apology once, in email, formal, like he'd Googled how. In it, he called his behavior a disease, a term he likely thought would invoke pity, or at least justify pattern. Claire read it once, then archived it. Maybe the therapist she referred him to would help him learn the right language. Maybe not. Either way, it wasn't her job anymore. Across town, June began again. A clinic hired her, thanks to Claire's lawyer friend's wife, who believed in people more than paper resumes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And after everything, real was enough. She started paying back the $200 Claire had lent her for an internet modem. $10 bills folded into napkins, tucked inside handwritten thank you notes that smelled faintly of diner coffee and whatever courage was left at the bottom of June's pockets. Once, Claire tried to wave it off. "It's not about the money," she said. June just nodded. "I know," she replied, "but I still owe you." And she kept paying, until the ledger between them felt balanced in a way apologies never quite could. There were consequences that didn't make for good television. The house was quieter at night, not dramatically, just stubbornly, like a place getting used to its own echo. The baby Claire had once wanted so badly now felt like a word she couldn't say out loud. Not because she'd given up on it, but because grief sometimes wraps itself around hope like a frost that hasn't melted yet. Some friends chose Evan. Others chose Claire. Most didn't choose at all. They just disappeared. Revealing, in the end, that silence can be a loyalty too. The sugar canister stayed on the counter. Claire thought once about throwing it out, but didn't. Because you don't let betrayal claim your kitchen. You don't let villains evict you from your own rituals. You keep what's yours. On the first truly cold morning of December, Claire baked. Not cookies, not apology pies. A tart. Small, simple, salted. Caramelized sugar browned to the edge of burn, then softened with cream. A balancing act. Bitterness pushed to the brink, then coaxed back into sweetness. Her therapist had suggested it. Teach your mouth the difference, she said, between bitter and ruined, between fire that consumes and fire that creates. Claire stood at the stove, stirring carefully. She didn't rush the sugar, watched it bloom from clear to pale gold, to honey to amber, held it at the tipping point, then, just before it burned, added the cream and butter. Let the fury hiss and settle into calm. She wrapped a slice in parchment, left it on June's welcome mat with a note. For the rent we both paid. That evening, her phone buzzed. "I'm sorry. Not asking for anything. Just, your tart made me cry." Claire typed back. "It's the salt." She paused, deleted it, typed again. "It's okay to cry." Months passed. Divorce papers were signed. Claire moved into a smaller place, sunny, with clean walls and no shared echoes. It felt like breathing with new lungs. One afternoon, she saw Evan at the grocery store. Of all places, the sugar aisle. He reached for the same white bag they used to buy together. Their eyes met, briefly. No anger, no sting. Just the dullness of recognition. He looked ordinary, not like the storm that had broken her. Just a man with tired eyes comparing produce. That, in a strange way, was both the hardest and the best part. The monster under the bed had turned back into a person, and Claire felt no urge to punish him, no urge to forgive either. Just nothing. She was finished. On a quiet Sunday in early spring, Claire hosted what she called a small mercy brunch. No big guest list. 3 friends who'd stayed. Her lawyer friend and his wife, June, who brought coffee and hovered near the edge of the kitchen, present but careful. There were no speeches, no dramatic music cue,
Just the low hum of chatter, laughter that sounded like it belonged there. Someone asked for sugar. Claire reached for the canister, unscrewed the lid, and passed it without hesitation, as if it had never been anything but ordinary sweetness. June held the spoon a beat too long before passing it on. They didn't need to say anything. This wasn't forgiveness. This was the quiet peace between two people who'd survived the same wreck, just in different lifeboats. That was the reconciliation the story had earned. Not a return to the way things were, but a truce with what came after. Claire had rebuilt something, not flawless, not fairy tale, but solid, real. A life with windows that showed the weather honestly, and a kitchen that made room for salt next to sugar, without pretending they were ever the same thing. Then the doorbell rang. A neighbor, a question, a request. Claire smiled, genuinely this time. "Just a second," she called out, and went to open the door. Because in a life that had once collapsed under the weight of pretending, she had finally built something better. A home that told the truth, and a woman who answered it.